Hi, my name is Kerry Critchlow from RCR Recording Studios, and today we're going to be talking about how to put together some chord progressions. Now, if you've been with us in, on this channel, and you may have recognized this sheet from previous videos. This is a major scale formula, and it goes through and kind of shows you how you can put together the chords and the notes and everything that kind of belong within any major key. In this case, we're using the example of the key of C, but we have these chord degrees here, right? One, this Roman numeral 1, this is going to designate the first note in our scale, or the first chord in our scale. The minor 2, that's denoting the second chord in our scale, and that's a D minor, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I highly encourage you to check out our videos on music theory and and the major scales and stuff like that, and this will make a lot more sense. But today we're going to be kind of covering how you can use this to create some fun chord progressions to get you started in music production, because I feel like a lot of people tend to struggle with that kind of aspect, especially people who aren't as familiar with music theory or don't have a real good understanding of how these things kind of work together. So what I've done is I put together a sheet, and it's going to correspond to this. And these are some chord progressions to get you started in music production. And you can figure out all of the notes within these chords as well. So using a fun little formula. So if we want to know what the chords are in a C major scale, it's going to be the first. We're going to skip one, then use that, the third one, skip one, and then use the fifth one. And that's going to work for any chord. So in the key of C, we have C, skipping, E, skip, G. So C, E, and G are the three notes that make up the chord of a C major. For a D minor, it's D, skip, F, skip, A. So D, F, and A make up a D minor chord. And this, like I said, this works for everything. A minor, if you want to know what the chords are in an A minor, it's A, skip, C, skip, E. So A, C, and E make up an A minor. And that's how this all works, right? So you can figure out any of the notes that belong to any of these chords. But we're going to go through these chords. And what you see here is we have the chord progression here with the Roman numerals. So you can transfer this to any key you want. It does not have to be in the key of C, but we're going to be using the key of C as our examples here today. But if you followed our music theory, you can figure out how to put these Roman numerals into any key that you want, and it'll sound the same relatively, because the chords correspond. So like, for instance, in the key of G, the 1 would be a G, the 5 would be a D, the 6 would be an E minor, and the 4 would be a C. And it would have the same kind of relative sound as, the key of C, right? Using that 1, 5, 6, 4 progression. Anyways, this 1, 5, 6, 4 progression is probably the most common chord progression that you're going to hear in music, like ever. It's very easy to write melodies over. It's very happy and poppy. So like you're going to hear this in a lot of modern pop music. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, so that's a C, G, A minor, F. And then you can use variations on that. For instance, this works for any chord progression you're using, but you can start on a different chord and kind of keep going through the same way. So like, for instance, instead of starting on the 1, we're going to start on the 5 and play through the whole thing. So if we start on the 5, we're going to have a G, an A minor, an F, and a C. So the chords are in the same order, we're just starting on a different chord. So in that case, it would sound like this. You can also do it starting on the A minor. You can also do it starting on the F, like, et cetera, et cetera. So any of these chord progressions, you can use the base chord progression, or you can use their variations, which just means you start on a different chord, but play through the same order. And hopefully this is making sense. The second chord progression is a 4-1-6-5. And in the key of C, that's an F, C, A minor, and G. And again, if you play this in any key, it's going to have the same relative sound to it. It's just going to be a little higher or lower in pitch, and that's kind of the main differential. So you can put these into different keys, mostly in order to either make it easier to play on whatever instrument you're using, or to be able to sing the melody in an easier key for whatever your vocal range is. But like I said, we're just going to keep it simple today and keep it in the key of C. But this is what a 4-1-6-5 sounds like. Okay, and you can add different rhythm elements and stuff like that, and it'll change up kind of the feel as well, how fast, how slow you're playing it. These are all going to make an impact. For instance, we'll take that same chord progression, but we're going to slow it down a little bit. Has a different feel to it, right? But same chord, same everything. But you kind of get a different flavor, a different feel from it. But you can also do variations on this. So instead of starting with the F, or starting on the 4 chord, we're going to start on the 1 chord and play through the same order of the chord. So it'll, instead of F, C, A minor, G, we're going to play C, A minor, G, F. Same order, just we're starting on a different chord, right? And it gives you kind of a different feel, different vibe, right? And so you can use these variations to kind of change up the vibe or the flow or the feel of whatever kind of progression you're working on. Or you might find more inspiration from the variations than you do from the original, and that's fine. I'm just giving you some examples, but this would be the second variation, and you can use, and there's more variations obviously, but you can start on the A minor, and it would sound like this. Okay, and then our third chord progression is a 2 chord progression. So far we've been kind of going over 4 chord progressions. This is a 2 chord progression, and it's just a 1 and a 3, or a C and an E minor. And that's going to sound like this. You'll hear that often in music as well. It's a fairly common chord progression, and it's got kind of a sadder sort of vibe to it. So if you want to go for a more emotional song, something that's a little bit sadder, you can use those 2 chords to kind of make it, feel a little bit more melancholy. You can also use the variation, which is just, E. Instead of starting on the C, you start on the E minor C. So. Okay. Again, it's going to have more of a melancholy, sad, kind of downer vibe to it. And so you can use that to your advantage. The fourth progression we're going to go over is an A minor, a C, an F, and a G, or a 6-1-4-5. Again, feel free to put this in whatever key you want. We're just using A minor, the key of C, for simplicity's sake today. But that chord progression is going to sound like this. Okay, and you can also use the variations on that. Again, it's just the same order of the chords, you're just starting on a different chord. So in this case, instead of starting on the A minor, we're going to start on the C. Okay. And then the third variation, and again, you can use any variation. I guess technically there's going to be 4 variations for every 4 chord progression. But the second variation we're going to use is, I guess the third variation we're going to use is starting on the F. Okay, and again, you can play these in different vibes, different rhythms, different speeds, different things that are going to make it a little bit different, depending on what kind of vibe you're going for. So you can add a little bit more of a kind of a rhythmic thing. Gives it a kind of a different vibe, right? You can play it in different time signatures too if you want to. So that same chord progression, but like a 3/4 instead of a 4/4 would be something like this. Okay, so feel free to use any variations. You can change time signatures. You can change tempos, make it faster, make it slower, put some different rhythmic elements into it, and play around with it. And you can kind of have some fun with these chord progressions and their variations. The fifth chord progression we're going to look at today is a 2-6-1-5, and that's in the key of C, a D minor, an A minor, a C, and a G. And that sounds like this. Okay, and because it has 2 minors in it, it's going to have a bit more of a melancholy or sadder vibe, right? The more minors you add to a chord progression, the sadder it's going to sound. The more majors in the chord progression, the happier it's going to sound. Excuse me. And then we can use the variations as well. Again, just starting on a different chord, but playing the chords in the same order. So we're going to start this time on the A minor. Okay. Or we can use the third variation, which would be a C, G, D minor, A. Okay. Again, feel free to play around with all aspects of this to make it more interesting or like whatever's grabbing your ear, whatever makes it sound more interesting or exciting or cool or vibey to you. Play around with it. You can change the time signatures. You can change the tempos. You can change the rhythms. You can change the order of the chords you're playing using the variations or whatever. But the key here is to find something that grabs your attention or makes you get into a creative space where you want to start writing. Then the last chord progression we're going to look at today, and there's so many out there. These are just a few to get you started. They tend to be a little bit more common. I wanted to add, use chord progressions that had all of the majors and minors within them. So, we have one with the 3 in it. We have one with the 2 in it, the 4, the 5, the 6, etc. Just to kind of give you some stuff. You can also play around with substituting out any of these chords for any of the other chords. So, for instance, you can substitute out this 6 chord with a 3 chord if you wanted to. So instead of a D minor, A minor, C, G, it would be a D minor, E minor, C, G, and that would sound something like this. Right? Or you could separate. You can sub out any of these chords for any other chord in the C major scale, or in the this Ionian mess you got going on here. But C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, a B diminished, or a C. You can substitute out any of the chords and any of these progressions for any of these chords, and it will sound, it will technically work. It may not sound the best to your ears, but you can kind of experiment and have fun with it and try out any kind of substitutions you want to put in there. I would be careful using the B diminished or the 7 chord. There's a reason I haven't really put it in any of these progressions. Diminished chords tend to be a little odd and are not conducive, generally speaking, to like popular music. With exceptions. There's obviously always exceptions to the rule, but you need to be careful with diminished chords. They're a little funky and can make things sound a little odd. So just beware. I'm not saying never to use it. I'm just saying that it may not be it probably should not be your go-to chord to try for substitutions. But if you want to try it, feel free. There are no rules here. But anyways, we're going to get into our last progression here, and that's a 1-4-5-4. And in this case, I wanted to use something that had repeating chords, right? So we're going from a C to an F to a G to an F, and kind of that back and forth feel, and that's going to sound like this. All right, so you kind of have that back and forth, and it's a happier vibe because they're all major chords. There's no minors in there, and so it's going to have that very happy kind of feel to it. And again, you can use variations here, so like F, G, F, C. Excuse me. Or you can use a G, F, C, F as another variation. Okay, again, have fun with it. You can substitute out any of those chords for another chord. You can substitute out one of the Fs for an E minor or an A minor or whatever. If we substitute out the 4th F, for instance, for an A minor, and we're going to do a C, F, G, A minor. You can do that, or a D minor, or whatever chord you want. But any chord in the C key of C is going to work well, generally speaking, with any others, with the exception of this B diminished. Usually, there's very specific places you want to put the B diminished in order to make it work within your chord progression. But otherwise, feel free to sub out any of the 1 through 6 chords for any others. Another thing you can do for fun, if you want, is to make the majors minors or the minors majors. So, for instance, if we come back up to our number 3 chord progression here, this C to E minor, if you want to give it a real fun kind of twist, you can make this E minor an E major, and it's going to have a whole different feel. So we're going to play the original, the C and E minor here. And that has kind of that sad melancholy feel. But if we make that E minor an E major, which is technically outside of the key of C, it still works for reasons we're not going to get into today, but it gives a whole new vibe to the sound, and that's going to be this. And it gives a whole, it stops being melancholy sounding and now starts to sound kind of like, I don't even know what the right word to describe it would be. Maybe like a happy or adventurous, ethereal. Like I'm not 100% sure what the right word is, but you can hear the difference between the two. And so you can play around with making some of the majors minors or some of the minors majors in your chord progression and see if any of that works. It will not always. I just want to point that out. It will not always work real well when you make a major a minor or a minor a major, but in some cases it works really well, and you can kind of run into some fun, happy accents. Like for instance, if we do this C, G, A minor, F, we can maybe make that F a minor as well. So we'd have and that's what that F minor would sound like instead of the F. Or you can replace the, you can do a C, G, F, and then an F minor, which is another fun kind of thing to do. So we get rid of the A minor and we do a 1, 5, 4, minor 4. Okay, so you can have some fun with doing those types of substitutions as well. So you can use any of the chords within the key of C major, which is a C, a D minor, an E minor, an F, a G, an A minor, technically a B diminished, but be careful with it. Or you can make the minor chords major, so instead of a D minor, you can make it a D major. Instead of an E minor, you can make it an E major, or instead of a C major, you can make that a C minor. In order to do that, you just need to flat the third. In order to make a major a minor, you flat the third. In order to make a minor a major, you sharp the third. It's not going to be as readily obvious on how to do that. It's a little bit more of an advanced technique. You can't do like a quick fun like C, skip E, or skip D, E, skip F, G to kind of come up with their C major. But an E flat, a C, E flat, and a G is going to be a C minor. So here's your C major, and then your C minor. And that's a C, E flat, and a G. So we're flatting the third. So if we have a C as our 1, E as our 3, and 5 as our G as our 5, the third, which is the E, gets flat, so that becomes an E flat. In order to make, say, an F major chord, an F minor chord, we're going to flat the third. So F, skip G, A is our third, skip B, C. So our major chord is F, A, and C. We would want to make our A an A flat in order to make it an F minor. And to make an E minor an E major, you're going to sharp the third. So E, skip F, G, skip A, B. Our chord would be E, G, and B. That's an E minor. G is our third, so we'd want to sharp it, and that's going to be a G sharp now. So if you want to make an E minor an E major, you change the G chord to a G sharp. So instead of our E minor, it becomes an E major. There's a G sharp. So hopefully this helps. If you want to get into the more, advanced stuff and use major and minor substitutions, you can play around with it, have fun. But for those who want to keep it a little bit more simple, just stick to this C major scale and the chords in the C major scale. And feel free to swap out any of these chords for any of the chords here. Play around with the variations and kind of just see what, tickles your ears, what makes you kind of gets inspired, or like anything you hear that kind of inspires you to create and kind of jump on that. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.